Part of the structure to organizing speedruns by several players across several categories of several games is verification. When a run is submitted to a leaderboard, be it a community run one or a speedrun.com one, a moderator has to verify it, meaning they look at it and either accept the run to the leaderboard or reject it for a myriad of reasons. Signs of cheating, not meeting the category's video requirements, poor video quality, stuff like that. It's an important role, but it also requires a major commitment. Although for some moderators, the level of commitment is a bit different. The impetus for this video was something I saw while randomly browsing Twitter. Specifically, it was a post from Dr. T-Chops, who's run several games in the Fallout, Elder Scrolls, and Dishonored series, just to name a few. In early 2022, he said the following about verifying speedruns, quote, "No one should be fully watching every single run that gets submitted to a leaderboard. That's absurd. It's just for fun. Who cares?" My initial knee-jerk reaction was quite negative. The idea of someone verifying runs without watching them is, frankly, absurd, and it's pretty easy to come up with scenarios where letting runs go by unchecked can hurt a community. But then I reread his statement, particularly this part. No one should be fully watching every single run. And that got me thinking. I'll share my own thoughts on the idea of not fully watching every run near the end of the video, but I wanted to gain some perspective from the moderators of other leaderboards. I sent out messages to several moderators of several different games, asking whether they agreed or disagreed with Dr. T-Chops' statement and why. I left open the option to remain anonymous and will honor that for those who didn't give the green light to be on the record. In looking for moderators to speak with, I wanted to cast as wide a net as possible to account for as many variables as possible. One thing I considered was whether a person moderated one or multiple games. In reaching out to people who specifically moderate one game, I received a response from NoHeadZ, who is one of two moderators for a single game, Snow Brothers on the NES, a game whose longest and shortest runs across all categories are over 30 minutes and under 16 minutes, respectively. He said that runs which are lower on the leaderboard typically don't have the same level of scrutiny as ones that are placed much higher. Verify the critical points, make sure it's timed correctly, and it's fine. For higher ranked runs though, he said he would watch the entire run. Quote, "I am not a speedrunning historian, but there have been many instances of players who find ways to cheat in order to obtain high or top positions on speedrunning leaderboards. And I think for that reason, mods should do their best to maintain the integrity and fairness for the legitimate players. There have luckily been no experiences within the game I mod that have led me to this way of moderating. I mod this way because I know how much time and effort many of our players have put in. And I don't want the fun or excitement of our leaderboard to be tarnished by cheaters. It's important to remember that moderators volunteer their time, and if the mod doesn't have the time or just doesn't want to put in the work, then maybe it's time for a new mod who will do the work." Aside from giving me flashbacks to a topic I discussed in a previous video, NoHeadZ makes fair points about the ability and availability of a moderator, as well as the note about critical points. When you watch enough runs of a game, you tend to figure out where the most likely points are for someone to cheat, or certain ways to tell when someone is cheating. Another moderator I contacted was well aware of Dr. T-Chops' post and completely agreed with it. He or she or they has verified over 2,000 runs for 8 different games, where the runs can range from a couple minutes long to just over an hour. This person saw the benefit in watching the whole run for verification, but didn't see it as necessary, particularly for super popular games where there are sometimes multiple runs being submitted on a daily basis. Quote, Now you could argue that's on the moderators for being lazy and not caring about the leaderboard status, but if you were in that situation, would you not get sick of it? Chances are at first it won't seem too bad, but once you start seeing runs stack up and then have to look through them all, you'll get tired of it. All that being said, this person was very aware of the concerns involved with this approach and was against the idea of not watching the runs at all. Quote, "I want to point out that while I don't think every run should be watched through, I think mods should just look through a bit of it to see if anything's suspicious." Though not directly referencing it, this did remind me that it's possible for speedrun.com leaderboards to be set up to automatically accept submitted runs without anyone watching them. It's supposed to be a way to make sure inactive mods don't prevent new runs from getting posted. But it's also been abused to get cheated runs onto leaderboards with no oversight. Given the discrepancy between this moderator's experience and that of NoHeadZ, my question then became if moderating several games caused any sort of shift in perspective. One person I contacted is a moderator of 16 different leaderboards who has verified over 600 runs, all adding up to over 140 hours worth of speedruns. They said they agreed with Dr. T-Chops' sentiment while also echoing some of the things NoHeadZ said about scrutinizing higher ranked runs more and skimming through the key points of slower runs. Quote, "Especially with one of the longer games I moderate, world record is just 10 minutes shy of 2 hours long, I don't have time to sit down and watch every 2 hours or more run that gets submitted. And if someone happens to be cheating in one of those runs, well then, congrats. You put in all that effort to cheat, only to not even get a top time." Another moderator responded who oversees the leaderboards for 6 different games, verifying over 450 runs for full game categories, which can range from just under an hour long to over 12 hours long. This is what they had to say about the thought of watching all of these runs from start to finish for verification. Quote, "I personally only fully watch every second of a run if it's a top contender, top 3. Otherwise I'll look at the key points in the speedrun. Although it would be different per speed game. There are some games where you can just look at key points to make sure the run isn't breaking any rules. Others you have to look at every possible thing. Every possible thing could have a few different meanings. It could be something as simple as making sure an on-screen timer is present when it's supposed to be and the numbers don't change for no apparent reason, or an ammo counter or health bar staying the same between cutscenes or loading screens. There's a definite pattern emerging as far as how the position on a leaderboard affects the way it's treated by moderators. But another mod brought up something about verification I hadn't considered. HypnoShark moderates 15 different leaderboards, namely several Crash Bandicoot racing games, and has verified over 1,000 runs, including over 600 runs totaling more than 700 hours for Crash Team Racing alone, and nearly 2,000 hours worth of speedruns across all games. HypnoShark said, quote, "I think from a fundamental standpoint, you shouldn't have to watch the entirety of every run that's ever been submitted. As for games that I run, such as Crash Team Racing, having 300 plus runs on the board is a tough look. Not to mention that the mods have lives. No one is getting paid to mod the boards. It's all for a love of the game. That being said, there is no game without rules being upheld, and so doing as much as you can within reason should be the norm. For me, I usually check the start and end to the run, and skim through the rest either on 2x speed or simply by clicking through. As simple as it sounds, I hadn't considered watching runs on a higher playback speed. This is particularly easy to do with anything uploaded or streamed on YouTube, as the player has a built-in option to change a video's speed to be much faster or slower than normal. There were some factors that didn't come up during my discussions with this group of moderators. The topic of bounties never arose, though I'd assume those would certainly demand being watched in their entirety. There's also the matter of runs being recorded offline versus performed on a live stream, as the former are far more open to manipulation. That's not to say live runs can't be cheated, with such infamous examples as Lee's fake Yoshi's Island world record, or Mecharazium faking a world record for Metal Gear Rising Revengeance during a Games Done Quick event. But with live play and a webcam showing the controller, live streams generally satisfy the burden of proof much more easily. This is why whenever I do speedruns, even offline ones, I will still try to have a webcam showing my controller. I didn't always do this, but once I realized how important it was from a proof standpoint, I pretty much do it all the time now. Speaking of, there's one moderator whose thoughts I haven't given you yet. Mine. I moderate 10 games and have verified almost 150 runs over the past 4 years, and the longest run I verified is just over an hour long. For most of the boards I moderate, I am either the only moderator or the only active moderator, and the games I moderate tend to have fairly long stretches with no submissions. As for whether I agree with Dr. T. Chops' words, my answer is the one that no one wants to hear, but which is usually the right one. It depends. Some of the games I moderate have an in-game timer that is on screen for most of the run. For those games, I usually watch most of the gameplay and skip over loading screens while making sure the timer doesn't change between them. Another game I moderate doesn't have an in-game timer, but the rules say to add together the time spent on each stage. Again, I'll skip the loading screens and watch most of the fights just to make sure the player isn't doing anything suspicious. But my focus is on the timer and making sure they don't make any mistakes calculating their time. Then there are those games that don't have in-game timers or timers of any sort. For these games, I will typically watch the entire run. I do this to maintain integrity of the boards, but I also do it because for some of these games, I'm legitimately interested in seeing how other people approach speedrunning them. I once had a run submitted for Dragon's Lair for the SNES, a game that I haven't run in nearly 7 years, from a Belgian runner named Chile9K. The run wasn't at the top of the leaderboard, it was actually the slowest one in its category, and Chile was speaking French the whole run, so I couldn't understand what he was saying. But I watched the whole thing anyway. It reminded me of what I went through trying to put together a decent run. Learning things like enemy patterns, exit locations, item locations, and how to get Dirk to stop sliding all over the place, as well as the struggle of trying to put all that together into one cohesive run. And this is where I disagree with the "it's for fun, who cares" part of Dr. T. Chops' assessment. Cause I don't just have fun performing speedruns, I have fun watching them too.